Oh, wow. Thank you, Michael. And thank you to our listeners here in Australia and all over the world to another episode on Life Stories. I'm Marty here. Michael's up in Sydney, and we have a very special guest, which is Kevin MacDonald, author. And I think this is going to kind of explain his book is called A Life Less Ordinary. And I think that's going to explain his story. So lovely to meet you, and thank you for coming on, Kevin.
Thanks for having me.
Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you too, Kevin. I'm up here in Sydney. I'm a bit croaky at the moment, but just forgive me.
I have a bit of a cough as well. It's all the dust in South Sudan.
Yeah.
I'll have another cigarette and then we can all have a cough together. Michael, I'd like you to kick off the questions.
Oh, yeah.
Please.
Well, just talking to Kevin, as I said, we do live stories, and I've read a bit of Kevin's, and it's 10,000 miles long. That's an exaggeration, but it's a great story, a brilliant story, and A Life Less Ordinary. If you really want a book that's going to grab your imagination and take you to another world or different worlds, A Life Less Ordinary would be a book I would consider that you'd look at. But Kevin, starting up in, you were born in County Mayo, is that right?
Yeah. So I was born in Castlebar, County Mayo, and
Castlebar. And what was life? In what year was that? Just sort of interest.
that was 1960.
60. So what was life like around Castlebar?
It was great. We were fortunate in that my dad, God rest him, had the only car in New Antrim Street, and every Sunday we would take off and we'd explore the highways and byways of County Mayo. So I think at a very early age, my parents had sort of instilled a sense of adventure, a sense of being inquisitive about the area around, and that lasted with me. It's still with me.
Yeah.
One of the interesting things about growing up in Castlebar is that there was a large FCA barracks, and when we were in national school, in the barracks there was a small 25-meter shooting range. But when we were in national school, we could hear the gunfire coming from the barracks, and that suddenly became, we had to try and sneak into the barracks and see the guys shooting and collect the empty brass and all that kind of stuff. And then during the summer, they'd go off on what was known as maneuvers, exercises, and you'd see these armored cars and motorbikes, and I thought to myself, I'm getting in there as soon as I can. So you're supposed to be 17 before you join the reserve. Let's just say I was creative with my birth cert, and I ended up having a license for Land Rovers, Bedford trucks, and I think the Leyland armored car before I was legally old enough to drive on the road. But it was great. I loved the FCA. I spent
Kevin, was any of your family in the army or in the armed forces at any time?
My uncle Taddy was in the LDF, I think, as it was then, before he emigrated to America, and then he spent a short time in the American Army. But he would be, and my brother was in the FCA as well. But apart from that, there was no, would say, tradition of would say, military service in our family.
Well, the FCA played a big part, from I can gather, in your life in the beginning, and even at the end of your towards the end of it, not your life, but your service. I think you went back to the FCA. You got some.
Yeah, so
is that true?
I'm one of the few people in the Irish Army that I started off as an FCA trooper in the barracks in Castlebar. I ended up as an FCA troop sergeant in the 5th Cav Squadron. Then I went and I joined the regular army as a private. Eventually took the scenic route and got commissioned. I came back. Before I got commissioned, I came back as a PDF, as a full-time training sergeant to the same unit. Then I went off and I got commissioned. I came back intermittently as a training officer. And then at one stage, I ended up as being the commanding officer of Castlebar Barracks. So I went from recruit to commanding officer over a spell of about, I don't know.
Well done, Kevin.
That was a big, and I know, yeah, you're right. Your parents, I'd say you had a kind of a curious mind. I think I just said if the fellas were in the pub drinking beers and having a good time, you'd be away and doing something else, or looking at something, or maybe the architecture of the building or something.
Well, yeah, and I was never one of these guys that would go to, we'll say, a resort in Spain where you get your all-day Irish breakfast. Whereas, if you go into the hinterland and you can meet real people and drink wine and whatever, and see the real Spain rather than, we'll say, the pastiche that you get in some of these resorts.
Right. And tell me, just before we'll keep moving on, you were in the motorcycle brigade was very much part of your life in the FCA. And
Yeah, I was fortunate in that the 5th Cav Squadron was a cavalry squadron. So
okay, yeah.
every cavalry soldier is supposed to be able to drive, operate a radio, and operate the guns of an armored car.
Okay. And what there's a story about you driving down the road, the middle of Castlebar, standing on the saddle of the.
No,
No,
not the middle of Castlebar. So it was during the summer, and there was some kind of tourist festival in Westport, which is only about 11 miles away.
Yeah.
So 3 or 4 of us were asked to go over with motorbikes to try and, to lead the opening parade around the town of Westport. So of course we were let off unsupervised. So we had a motorbike race from Castlebar to Westport. And I don't know if you're familiar with Westport, but Westport is a very steep hill that descends into the town. So I decided that I kind of had a quick look around, and I stood up on the saddle and I had my arms out like that, like a scene from the Titanic. And as I'm coming down the hill, there was a Garda squad car waiting to collect us to bring us to the start of the parade. And they just saw this guy standing in. Anyway, they didn't arrest me that particular time.
And that's just you say that if I can jump in there. You said my dad was in the 1st Armored Squadron on the Cork camp, and we used to go. I've still got a picture of him, and they used to do all the stuff on the bikes, on the motorbikes.
Oh, they did a great stunting there, yeah.
Yeah, and they used to do in Newbridge. They did one, and it's funny because they had all these 14 men lying down, and then one at the end, and the one at the end had to have his head up, and it was Captain O'Connor, same name but not related. He was riding the bike, and I looked at it, and everyone went, "Why did your dad have his head up? Was he because the bike could have? He was the last man." And purely he goes, "No," he goes, "The cameraman said it'd be a good shot to get your head up." He put his head up. No one else, all the rest. But my dad was in the armored car section, Kevin, and he was in Jarrettville in the 2 armored car sections there with Kevin Knightley and all the boys. But you just triggered that in my head. But please, Michael, carry on.
Well, we'll finish. But just tell me this, Kevin. I was always intrigued about the border between. And I was in the army. We never were near the border in the regular army. The FCA were very much involved on border patrol. Is that right?
Well,
yes, am I wrong?
No, it's kind of yes and no. What happened when the border crisis kicked off, and the Irish Defence Forces formed 3 new battalions: the 27th Battalion, the 28th Battalion, and the 29th Battalion, which were in, we'll say, Dundalk, Finner for the 28th Battalion, and Monaghan, Cavan, Cootehill for the 29th. And they were still trying to bring these units up to full strength by taking people from Cork and Dublin and whatever. So at the time, there was a lot of FCA units, in various little villages in Donegal and in Cavan and in Monaghan and Dundalk. And they utilised a lot of FCA people to bolster the regular army. And essentially what a lot of them will be doing will be static guard in the barracks or static guard in some of the power station there in County Donegal. And that was to kind of let the regular troops be freed up to go on mobile patrols. Okay. So yes, they were stood up, and a lot of them were essentially full time.
Yeah. Yes.
So they did a lot of work in supporting the border,
Yeah.
but it wasn't.
Yeah.
It was because these units weren't fully formed.
Yeah. And so, okay, so if we carry on then, we put the FCA one side. I remember seeing something after that. Did you join your brother or something on a tour of Europe or Denmark on a motorcycle as well?
You've got
Yeah.
it.
So,
oh my God, Michael, you've done your notes.
I'm just giving
so
to
at,
it.
at the time, my brother Brendan was working in the Irish Embassy in London, and he had an 850 Suzuki, and I had a 750 Honda. So he decided we would go to Denmark to visit a friend of his. So I drove from Castlebar, Dublin, got the ferry, Liverpool, London, spent 1 or 2 days there. Then we went to Denmark. This guy's body had been recalled to London. So we went from Denmark across Helsingør into Sweden. Then we went down to the southern part of Sweden to Malmo. And it was quite expensive. So we were looking at options. And from Malmo, we could either go to East Germany or West Germany on a ferry. And of course, this was in the early 80s when the whole situation in Poland with Lech Walesa and Solidarity was kind of kicking off. So we decided, as you do, let's go behind the Iron Curtain and go into East Germany, which we did. And as we landed in the port, there was a load of Russian warships. So, as you do, took a few pictures. Anyway, to cut a long story short, we had gotten a transit visa to go from, we'll say, the Polish border to the West German border without stopping. And we decided that we would stop in a small town to get something to eat. And got duly arrested and thrown into jail. And it was unusual that at the time we thought we'd be smart. We would change a few travelers' checks into West German Deutschmarks because they were worth 6 times the value of East German Deutschmarks. So when we got arrested and it was explained, this guy, he had a map. He rolled out the map, and of course it rolled back up again. Rolled it out the second time. Third time he takes out his revolver and he slaps it on the table to keep the map. And he's explaining you go from A to B and you don't stop. And sorry, it'll never happen again. And then he takes out a big charge sheet, and it was bilingual. It was in German and it was in Cyrillic. So we hadn't a clue. But the charge for stopping was 35 Deutschmarks, which was a week's wages at the time.
Yeah.
And of course, we only had West German Deutschmarks. So he made a serious amount of money on the two of us. But then when we continued on, the closer you got to the border with West Germany, all the fortifications started building up. Like at every road junction, there was maybe 4 or 5 armed soldiers. Then there might be a minefield, then maybe a bit of tillage. And when you get to the actual border itself, we'll say the first checkpoint is for your visa. And of course, to ring back to the village and have a big laugh about the 2 Irish guys. Then you go through about 100 yards where there's these automatic miniguns just moving back and forth like that. And then there's a place for your vehicle, where they put the mirrors under the cars and all that kind of stuff. And there was about 4 or 5 of those. It was intense enough. And then we got into Western Germany, and I asked the border guard, in West Germany, do we need to drive with our headlights on? Because in some European countries, motorbikes have to have headlights on. And he said, if you want them on, put them on. And it was such a change from coming out of East Germany.
Okay, sorry, Michael, go ahead there.
And no, just saying, if we move along, Kevin, that's the kind of the early part of. How many was in your family, by the way, siblings?
4. Myself and Brendan, and then 2 sisters, Sandra and Linda.
And your mom and dad, they still with you, or did they live?
No, they passed away. Passed away.
So then, when did you actually join the regular army as such? And give us a quick synopsis as how you got involved with the UN. And I don't know much about that.
Okay, well, yeah. So I joined in 83. And I did. It was strange because at the time there was no recruitment in the West, and when my CEO in the FCA was friendly with the CEO in Monaghan, so he agreed to recruit to me to attend for an interview to be a recruit in 1983. And at the interview, because what they wanted was people from the local area, so they'd stay. They didn't want someone from Cork who would want to transfer to Cork as soon as they can. So I had to give a commitment of 3-year service in the 29th Battalion before I'd look for a transfer. And ironically, the only way I got out of that commitment was to apply for selection for the Army Range Wing, which was the only exception to not applying for a transfer. So that's how I got out of the 29th Battalion. But at that time, I think every young soldier that joined the Leb, as in Lebanon, that was the place to go to. And everyone wanted to. So I was overseas within 11 months of joining the Army, I think. And I was made acting corporal overseas. Then came back, and then I applied for selection. But yeah, overseas is a big part of military service now. You know, obviously it wasn't back in the day.
And you because you live in South Sudan, and if I can just change a little bit because I'm very curious.
You can go forward and then come back again.
I've read lots of stuff that you said. Is what inspired you to write this book? And if I can put a second question into that. Like as in Michael and myself, co-founders of Moral Injury International, did you meet people that, like, I know lots of rates and figures that suicide or people or soldiers came back. Did you encounter any of that? And going back to my first point is, your book is amazing. What inspired you to do that? It speaks for itself, a life less ordinary. And I just want to ask you that question, please.
Well, first of all, a life less ordinary was a recruiting byline of the Irish Defence Forces back, I think, in the 90s. They were trying to get people to consider a life less ordinary. And back in, I think it was 2015, I was based in Jerusalem, and the then Chief of Staff, Rear Admiral Mark Mellish, came out for a visit. And I was driving him and his military assistant from Jerusalem up onto the occupied Golan Heights for a visit. And as we were driving up through the West Bank, I was regaling the two of them with various wild and wonderful stories that are escapades that I'd gone through. And the military assistant to the Chief of Staff, he said, "My God, Kevin, you've certainly lived a life less ordinary." And a little bell went off in my head. So fast forward to 2021, I'm in down on a course in Bangui, the capital of the Central African Republic. I've retired at this stage, and COVID came in, and the first week was a hard. I was transiting through, so I was just staying in someone's apartment. But the first week was a hard lockdown, and by day 2, I was literally going up the walls. So I've been kind of meaning to put my memoirs down on paper for a while, and that was the catalyst for me to do it. And initially it was just, from my wife, Claire, and my 2 kids, Ellen and Ben. And then suddenly, as you start writing, you start remembering. And the next thing, I was at like 100,000 words or something like that. And I thought, okay, there might be a book in this. And it's not just...
You start off with a page and you end up with...
Yeah. But it's
more. Yeah,
I suppose the beauty about my book is that it's not just the memoirs of a military guy. There's all the mountaineering stuff and the archaeology stuff as well. So it's a bit more blended or open, or it should appeal to more people, I suppose.
And Kevin, just go to bring in the human aspect to it. How did your wife and your family handle it? You must have moving around a fair bit. And
good question.
They move with you.
We were fortunate in that we as a family never had to move.
All right.
Within Ireland. I did the moving, whether it was in Cavan or Finn or wherever. But the one time we did move as a family was we moved to the Middle East when I was a military observer. And initially I was based in Tiberias on the Sea of Galilee. Excuse me. So Claire and the kids came out, I think, in June, and the kids were 4 and 5, something like that. And then in February 06, I was transferred to Lebanon.
Okay.
So we all moved to the southern city of Tyre.
Yeah.
The kids were going to an English-speaking Arab school. Life was great. We had them in Syria. We had them down in Wadi Rum in Jordan, up in Beirut. Life was great.
Did you have any sense of fear then, Kevin? As you
No,
moved
I'm
around?
getting to it. I'm getting to it. So they my normal routine was, we'll say on a Tuesday I'd go up to the patrol base for 7 days, then I come back for 4 or 5 days, and then go up again. So on Tuesday I went off, and at this stage Lebanon was calm. It was really peaceful. I went off on a Tuesday morning, and on Wednesday morning the war between Israel and Hezbollah kicked off, and that was 34 days of absolute butchery, a bit like what's going on now. And from where I was, I could see jets dropping bombs into the city of Tyre, where my wife and kids were. And Claire knew up in the skyline where I was based, could see the same thing happening. And it took the UN, I think, 2.5 weeks to evacuate the families. And at that stage, UNSO was a family mission. So we had 4 posts along the frontier with Israel. And when the evacuation was going to happen, the unit decided that anyone that was deployed in the 4 bases, they'd try and get them down in an armored car to say goodbye. And where I was near the village of Markaba, we were getting hammered, so I couldn't get out. So when my wife Claire and the 2 kids were getting into the lifeboat to bring them out to the ship, I rang her on the phone and they said, "I'll see you when I see you," which is not a great way to end a family mission.
No.
And then to make it worse, we had the strength of 52 military observers, 52 officers, and in I think 3.5 days we lost over 10%. We had 2 officers seriously wounded in 2 separate incidents, and then the Israelis dropped the JDAM bunker busting bomb into a post just up from me, killing 4 very good friends of mine. So yeah, 2006
did you had everything you went through with that you talk about, and I know I'm bagging here, but did they suffer from post-traumatic stress, a lot of them after, or
did I, or did
no?
they?
Well, you can tell me if you did, or did you suffer anything?
I did.
You did. Okay.
I think, well, put it this way. I don't know if I can say it. You can always edit it out. But if you pick up a friend of yours with no arms, no legs, and no head, that's not a sight this brain is designed to see. So my wife Claire would definitely say that when I came back, I got out on the first ship out of Tyre during the ceasefire, and yeah, I was a changed man. 100%.
And how do you? You don't mind me digging into this, but how did you feel the effect, and how did you cope with it? More to the point,
I wrote about it.
Yes, good answer.
And I at every opportunity I gave presentations to recruits, to NCOs courses, to officers courses, specific to Lebanon. And I suppose to the memory of my friends, but that helped me deal with it, because, and I've often explained, like I would always at the end of one of and in my presentations there's obviously some graphic images, and you would ask people at the end, is there any questions, and there'd be a few quite like, why did it happen, and blah blah blah, and I'd say, come on guys and girls, there's an obvious question here. But no one wants to talk about it. I said, PTSD. And then, because unfortunately in this country and probably over there as well, people will talk about cancer. They'll talk about broken legs. They don't want to talk about anything that's happening.
That's right. They keep Kevin, what you're saying there is so true, and that's what we do with moral injury. That's where we started. But it's like they keep silent. They don't talk about it.
Yeah, don't suffer.
And they more or less, as Michael always says, don't live in silence. But then,
unfortunately, the Lebanon has been very unkind. As you know, there's more UN troops died in the Lebanon. Over 40.
Yeah, we in our initial period there, we lost, I think, 47, 48. And even from all sides, from Hezbollah, from Amal, from Israelis, from the Israeli.
But even today, as the war goes on now, we've got our troops are in the Lebanon, and I think there's some discussions as to whether they should be there or not there. I don't know. I don't want to get involved in that, but they're still there, and they have been in every country of the world every year since they were formed in 1958. There's been a Irish UN presence, and from what I did some reading where, for a brief time, the Irish left the Lebanon during after they got in there, and they wanted them back again. They asked for the Irish.
Yeah, well, what happened there was
actually come back. Is that
when the Israelis withdrew in 2000, then they withdrew back into Israel. So then the Irish pulled out their contingent because they were being asked to supply a contingent to UNDOF, which is in Syria. And then after the war in 2006, when Union was being built up again to an even higher strength level, the Irish were asked to return. And certainly, like there's areas there that would have known Irish soldiers from 78 until 2000. Like there's people going around with Irish accents to this day in Lebanon. And the locals would have, I think, a very high regard of the Irish. First of all, we were never colonizers. We would have a different approach to de-escalating a situation than some of the other countries where they would escalate to de-escalate, whereas the Irish soldier could go in and chase them. Come on, what's going on?
You
know, like there's two ways of doing things. There's the hard military way, and then there's the way of let's sit down and talk about it.
But if
as Irish, we tend to be good at that.
You're very good, and the way you speak is. I just want to go back. Sorry, Michael. Just going back to when you say we're talking about post-traumatic stress and that, and how you dealt with it. Other members and what you do, I know, is very admirable. What you do, and your book is going to be very educational. But going back to did you know other people or how they suffered, or did people come, or did men, the word men or women, did they talk about it, or was it kind of a taboo?
I think it's still a bit of a taboo. I know when we eventually managed to transfer the remains, and initially we only found 3 bodies. It took a while to find the 4th. But we transferred the bodies across the technical fence, which is the frontier between the 2 countries. This is in the middle of a war. And when we crossed through this gate, there was an Israeli company lined up to secure the area, headed by a brigadier. And obviously they didn't want to be there because there was helicopter gunships going one way and Katyushas going the other way and artillery in the background. And I lined the guys up and I stood in front of the Israeli brigadier and I said, we're now going to have a minute's silence in the memory of my friends who were killed in the cause of peace. Now, it's a bit ironic having a minute's silence in the middle of all gunfire, but in fairness to this guy, in fairness to him, he stood to attention. And I had sufficient Hebrew that I could went to him afterwards and thanked him for his respect. But going back to what Marty is touching on, when we had done that and recrossed back into Lebanon, we had to spend that night in the Indian Battalion headquarters. So when we arrived, we hadn't washed in days and whatever. So there was an Indian sergeant major was kind of looking after us. There was five of us, I think. Um, and he was getting one of his guys to wash our clothes. And he said, "Is there anything I can get you?" And I said, "Sergeant Major, can you get us some beer?" And he said, "No problem." So I sat down with the lads and I said, "Look, we need to put this process through exactly what happened and how it happened and what we felt." And people will say, like the experts, if you have PTSD, alcohol is not a solution. And it's not a solution. But what it does do, it allows you to express yourself. So we had a couple of beers and we cried. But it managed to, I don't know, release something that was building up. I could see it.
When you
And
say,
I knew it was in me as well.
yeah, when you say, Kevin, did you cried with your mates? Did you keep that quiet for many years, or did you go home and be honest the same, like with your wife, or did you kind of
Oh yeah.
shelter them, or did you talk to your
No,
wife about it?
my wife, well, she can read me like a book, thanks be to God. But no, I didn't hold anything back. If I was down, I was down. If I was up, I was up.
Yeah, good.
Because, and I used to often say when I'd be given these presentations, you know, if you hold it in, it's going to come out at the worst possible time for you. You know, rather than expressing it in would say, a kind of a controlled environment with like-minded people, whether it's your wife and family, whether it's your comrades, but you need to be able to talk about it. Whereas if you think, "Oh, I'm a tough soldier, it's not going to happen to me," at some stage there'll be a trigger. And I'll give you an example. I was reading a long time ago about this SAS guy. He was on a counter-interrogation course, and he was stressed, and he was sitting on the couch, and his young daughter came up behind him and put her hands over his eyes, and he had a cup in his hand, and he just hit her in the head with a cup because that was his reaction. Because he had such stress levels from this particular course he was on. But that's what I mean. You know, if you don't like talk about these things, it will bubble up to the surface.
And the same thing, Kevin. Would you agree that a lot of men, and especially in the army? I mean, I grew up on the beautiful Curragh camp. I didn't serve in the army. My dad was in the army. Mike was in the army. You were in the army. But you think that, like, I'm talking about post-traumatic stress and mental health issues. Do you believe?
Marty, can I just say,
yeah,
they just completed the Royal Commission in Australia on suicide in the vets and the army generally. It's been a huge, very in-depth one, and one of the reasons why the army people stay silent is because if they give in, they'll be perceived as being weak.
That's what I was going to say, Michael.
And if you want to go on another deployment somewhere, to come and say, "Oh, I wouldn't say," you know, he's a bit. So they're afraid. That's the big reason.
You're 100%, Michael, and I also agree. And I've heard this from people going back from years. Is they wouldn't come back home and, like Kevin's saying, nowadays it's better, obviously, but talk to a mate, but they would actually because they wouldn't get promoted or wouldn't be able to go overseas and said, "Look, I need help." You know, it wasn't
listen, lads,
there.
we're kind of moving on here a bit, but the Lebanon, God bless you for being there, Kevin. That was a dreadful place for a lot of Irish people, and I'm sure there's millions of stories that will never be told. And the truth stories will never be told. But can we fast forward to today now? What are you doing? You're still with the UN, or?
Yeah. So as a commandant, you have to retire the day you turn 56, which for me was November 16.
Right.
And because I knew this was coming up, my last 2 years in the Defence Forces were essentially a year in Lebanon and a year in Jerusalem. Right. as a military observer, and I knew that retirement was coming down the line. I also knew that I was never going to take up golf, so I started applying for UN jobs, and by the time I had my retirement dinner in November, I had an offer of a 3-month contract as Chief Close Protection in the UN mission in the Central African Republic. And like a lot of places I've been in, I had to Google had to Google it, whether it was Mali or Western Sahara. I had to Google the Central Africa. Most people don't even know it's a country, and it's the size of France.
Yeah.
So I ended up getting. I spent 6 months in the capital. Then I spent 18 months as a regional security officer in an area about the size of Ireland, I suppose. And I got 18 months there, and then because I was on a temporary contract, 2 years is the max you can do. So I left, and then they asked me back, and I did another 2 years in Sector West near the Cameroonian border.
So what have you got left to do now? Yeah, have you got go to the moon somewhere?
I've got what?
Go to the moon maybe or something. You have an extraordinary capacity to do things.
I'm now in my third year in the newest country in the world, South Sudan, and I will have to retire for the second time in November of next year when I turn 65.
65. You're just a young man with just.
Kevin, you've got an incredible, as your father's probably told you, it could be don't just bypass something. Look at it and get the detail and find out why it works and what it does, and be inquisitive. Have this inquisitive, curious mind. But it's taking you to some unbelievable places, as people will see when they read your book, and how you kept notes and all that must have. And you talked about the PTSD with Marty. I think the writings and all that later on probably helps you to,
it does completely, because
a lot of that stuff out of your
it allows you to put the thoughts down on paper, and it allows you to process those thoughts as you're putting them down on paper, as it were.
Because
I think Michael, you just said there as Kevin there said, you've done your book, you've done so much in your career. And I think the way you spoke out there about post-traumatic stress, which I always relate to moral injury because there's two different things, but I think you speaking out to people, and especially vets and people that have lived through is going to help people. Now, guys, we've got to wind up the show, but I'll let Michael come on in a minute. But I want to say is, you have many admirers, and Noel O'Callaghan in Ireland does many things.
Role model.
Absolutely beautiful man, and I spoke to him. I give a shout out to him. And then you have met, and you bought some paintings from our colleague and friend Leo Quinlan from his art gallery, I believe.
One of his paintings is hanging in my accommodation in South Sudan.
I hope he didn't charge you for it.
I won't go down that road.
He charged him double. and listen, I just want people to know straight away that on it is the book, and it comes up on the front of this podcast, A Life Less Ordinary, and by Kevin MacDonald. It's worth a read. And I know for a fact, and it doesn't have to be Irish Army, it doesn't have to be whatever army, Australian, American, this will, as Kevin just said, hopefully people talk about it, as I believe everyone should write a book to get their story out. And it is, as Michael asked you, and I write myself, is the fact is, it is very calming. It is very therapeutical. Yes. Yeah. So now, Michael, I'm going to let you.
Well, I haven't got
then I'm going to let Kevin give a word.
To what I said. I didn't know Kevin at all an hour ago, and now I think he's the type of man that I've known you for a long time, my friend. I think
yes, I think our listeners will get that too.
In your disposition, and it's lovely to talk to a person who has traveled so much, which I haven't traveled anywhere near you, and you've got details of travel and all that, which I'm totally the opposite. I'm a bottom line person. Just tell me what it does for me and give it to me. I don't go into much detail. So it's fantastic to listen to you, and I'm sure the book, as Marty said, can be very therapeutical for people who travel. You don't have to be an army person. You've got a lot of stuff about traveling, and you said archaeology stuff. You've got lots of stuff in there that for a book that's amazing. And Kevin, it's been delightful to talk to you, make your acquaintance, and I hope one day in the near future Mayo will win a football. You get so tough. But anyway, it's lovely to talk to you, Kevin, and good night to you from Sydney.
Well,
And
Marty
Kevin, can
and
I
Michael,
let
thank you so much.
Can I let you finish off here and send a
Yes.
little message to people here in Australia and all over the world? Because I really admire what you've done. Can you send a message out to people that are thinking about talking out? And the way you spoke out there, which is very impressive, as Michael said, about post-traumatic stress. People need to talk to other people like a community. As Michael always said, don't live in silence or don't suffer in silence, whichever.
Well, as the old saying goes, it's good to talk. It actually is good to talk. And we need to get over the stigma. It doesn't matter whether you're in the military or not, but no one can be a hard man all the time. You could be, as I say in some of my presentations, you don't have to be in a war zone to get PTSD. You could be driving home from work and come across an accident and see things that this brain isn't designed to cope with. That's PTSD as well. So it's not limited to veterans. But I think males have a bigger problem talking about it than females, and it's part of this macho culture. You know, men don't cry and all that kind of stuff. Well, they do, and they need to. So if I could leave it with any one word, I'd just say it's good to talk the whole time.
Well, and now tell us quickly there now. What you're in Ireland at the moment. You live in South Sudan. So what, for our listeners, how did they get to your book? How can we find your book?
Okay. So the best way to get it is to go online, mailbooks.ie, and order. They ship worldwide.
Well, Kevin, I can't thank you enough. You're a lovely man, and it was a brilliant interview. It was like, as Michael just alluded to there, it was like three blokes just having a chat. And I'd like to thank all our listeners. I'd like to thank all our listeners here in Australia and all over the world. And thank you to Kevin. And just go to Moral Injury International to watch more connections towards Kevin's book. And you can see all of that and his bio. And thank you very much, Michael. Always a pleasure. Kevin, thank you so much.
See you, bye.
Thank you. Take care.
And good night. Thank you, guys.